text for today's sermon and lesson comes from one of the pastoral letters written by Paul. 3 letters, the 2 of his chief lieutenants in the field, Titus and Timothy. The first letter to Timothy was written at a time when the things in the mission field for Paul, at least, were going reasonably well. One commentator says that Paul writes as though in mid-stride. Things, while there were difficulties to be sure, were kind of on an upswing. That letter was probably written in 63 A.D. 4 or 5 years later, the attitudes had changed. By 2 Timothy, the tone is darker, more somber, less optimistic. In fact, in 68 A.D., Paul was executed. At the time of writing this, he may have been on what would be the equivalent of death row. What sort of tone would you take in writing to your children if you knew you had but a few weeks or months to live? He begins by saying, Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, by the will of God, for the sake of the promise of life that is in Christ Jesus, to Timothy, my beloved child, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Lord. I am grateful to God, whom I worship with a clear conscience as my ancestors did, when I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. Recalling your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, the faith that lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you. For this reason I remind you to rekindle the gift of God that is within you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Deacon, and thank you, Michael and Greg, and choir, ensemble, and bells, as we join together on this All Saints Sunday. Good morning, church. It's good to see you. You know, sometimes a minister will dig a hole that she finds it hard to get out of. And I found it interesting that last week we were talking about the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee, and I said that at that time in the ancient world, tax collectors were seen as treasonous, as people who had turned their backs against God and had exploited the people. And then on Tuesday, I received my tax bill for property taxes. And what I really should have said is tax collectors back then are nothing like tax collectors now, who are beautiful and God-fearing Christians. I hear that, amen. I did tell Carol Jean I was going to tell that joke. That's a good one. She gave me permission to tell that, so I appreciate that. But on this All Saints, we're reminded on the flip side of things that lament is just as important as our worship to God. That lament is a part of our tapestry of praise, and sometimes we forget that. So to have some silence within our time together, to hear the bell toll, and to read those names that have gone before us, is especially meaningful, at least for me, and I hope for you. All Saints Sunday affirms a deep and abiding understanding that we belong to something much larger than ourselves. Something that is multicultural, multinational, multi-generational. And we as believers, when we accept faith and receive faith and have faith, step into a river that has been running for a long time, thousands upon thousands of years, flowing all the way back to Eden and reaching into eternity. Writing to Timothy in his second letter, Paul knows this to be true. The church is a patchwork quilt of all of the saints that have passed on before us, ancestors who strive to live as God's people, and saints who encourage us now. Grandparents, parents, mentors, teachers, Sunday school teachers, spiritual friends, counselors, good neighbors, guides, spiritual parents, who inform and infuse our faith with brilliant insight and color and gifts to make us alive, to support us. And yes, even saints to come, our little ones, whom we delight in every Sunday, and those who will come before us. Paul's message is clear. Our faith is not entirely our own. It is just another patch that fits within a cosmic Christian tapestry made up of all God's people. Alone, we are but a swatch of color, an ember, a piece and strand of thread. But together with other believers in space and throughout time, Hebrew calls us the great cloud of witnesses. Your patch is a part of a vision of God's grandeur, a family portrait, an ember that is but a part of a larger flame, a furnace of God's glory, a gift of grace that we receive and that we are tasked not to keep to ourselves, but to pass on to others. It is not our own. And this is what Paul communicated to his pupil and friend Timothy. They were, after all, as Talmage mentioned, in two different stages and seasons of life. Paul was nearing death. He is looking back, and he is looking beyond the bars of imprisonment. A rabbi who is well-versed in the Jewish law, but accomplished church planter who embodied the gospel of Christ Jesus. Timothy is young. He is a different stage of his life. He is on the front end of his ministry, looking out, but proved to be a capable pastor in places like Thessalonica and Philippi, and now faces an uphill battle in Ephesus as he tries to combat and confront false teachings within the church and cults throughout the church. Unlike Paul, he was born into two different worlds. Timothy's mother was Jewish, his father was Greek, and it was his mother and his grandmother who took him to church, and his father probably was long past. And they're holding in this place as he's looking forward in his life, and when he is longing for Paul, who is imprisoned, he is facing this hardship within this place. And you can get the sense that Timothy longs for his teacher to be with him. Timothy's tears yearn for Paul's presence in this tumultuous time. His tears yearn for guidance. And Paul is writing from imprisonment, certainly longing to be with Timothy as well. And they look at each other knowing that the time is short for Paul. And that Timothy has to make haste in making sure that he leaves a legacy as well in Ephesus. In the first 7 verses of 2 Timothy, Paul goes out of his way to wrap up he and Timothy within a quilt, that patchwork quilt of the church. And there in that warmth and camaraderie between the two of them, they get the sense that they too belong to something much larger. That although Paul is confined to prison and Timothy is fighting this battle within Ephesus, that quilt reminds them that they belong to something so much larger. And the quilt encouraged Paul within this chapter to write of his remembrances of the various things that he has to teach Timothy. It places Timothy within that tradition in which we have these memories of those who have gone before us and those who sustain us even now. One commentator, Donald Guthrie, said this rich variety of remembrance emphasizes the apostles' reminiscent mood and his desire that Timothy himself should have a store of memory on which to draw. For one, Paul remembers Timothy in prayer. It is within the setting of worship and of gratitude, very much like us joining together today. We who join together in order to praise God within this posture of gratitude, so too does Paul remember Timothy in prayers. As he said, he worships, and not just he alone, but his ancestors who have come before him in a clear conscience, in order to remember Timothy constantly in prayer in this place of gratitude and in worship. Worship is the setting for this first memory, and gratitude is that posture, and Timothy is the subject, as they surround themselves with the spiritual ancestors that have informed Paul's faith. Timothy is not alone in ministry. Paul is not alone in ministry. And as we too gather in worship and in thanksgiving, we too remember our ancestors in the faith, the many names that we have mentioned here today, but so many more, as we too surround ourselves with the warmth of each other's encouragement and company and support. And we too remember that we are saints as well, according to Scripture. And so as we gather in worship and gratitude, remembering who surrounds us, we too need to be mindful and remember who we need to pray for. And so the first challenge for you today is a very simple one. Who is it that you need to remember in prayer always? Who is it that you need to perhaps write a letter to or reach out to? Who is it that you need to be a spiritual mentor, a spiritual friend to? And who needs your prayers today? To remind someone that you have in mind in order to help them see that they too belong to something much larger than just themselves. And there's no better time to reflect on that than now in this season of Thanksgiving, in which we head towards Thanksgiving when we're going to be surrounded by family, and we too come to God in gratitude for what we've been given, knowing that we need to pray for others and give it away. Who is it that you need to pray for, and remember in your prayers? Second, Paul remembers Timothy's tears. He says, I recall your tears. And we have to remember that tears tell stories. Tears tell us stories about what hurts. But tears also tell us stories about whom we love. And the greater we love one another, the greater we risk. And the greater we love one another, and the greater we risk, then the greater the tears are when we part ways. There's something about today's tears in our service. When we uttered those names and those names came to lips, or perhaps you saw a loved one written on the page, or said that loved one perhaps for the first time in a while, in which it brings tears, and we can't help but to think when we lose someone that close to us, and we get to that place where we can't stop crying, and we say, I thought I cried all I could, but I can't stop crying. How else are we supposed to bear witness to our great love for the person who has gone before us? How else are we supposed to communicate that we yearn to be together again on the other side of that heavenly shore? Several weeks ago, I told you, church, and I'll remind you again so that you get it in your head. Do not apologize for your tears. Your tears tell a story. It tells a story, just like Paul, of longing and of yearning on the one hand, and of joy on the other. Don't skip over the verse when Paul says he longs to see Timothy. I recall your tears, but there is joy involved. I am reminded of the time that Jesus is getting ready to go to the cross. In the Gospel of John, he is teaching his disciples in the very last week of Jesus' life, the very last few days. Jesus tells them that the Son of Man will be betrayed and given over to the authorities, that he will sacrifice himself and be crucified. And the disciples are stuck in this idea of grief that they're going to part with their best friend Jesus. And Jesus tells them, for instance, in John 14, let not your hearts be troubled. I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house there are many mansions. But if you keep reading that chapter into chapter 15, he talks about his joy as a part of that process of yearning and longing for them to be together. He assured them that even in their grief, that these things he has spoken so that Jesus' joy may remain in them, and that their joy may be complete. It's John 15, verse 11. In our remembrances and memories of our tears, and the recollection of our tears, they tell the story of our longing and yet our joy for having known and having loved and having risked and having abandoned so many for the ones that we love. Thirdly, Paul remembers Timothy's sincere faith and his family. This is a living faith that is pure, free from hypocrisy. It is a living faith that roots Timothy within his family, his spiritual family tree, and it conjures hope that all is well and all will be well, regardless of the obstacles that Timothy faces and the hardships he faces in ministry. Have you ever spent time with your family or your spiritual loved ones where you're perhaps going through conflict or a storm in which the roots of your family ground you, and you know instinctively that no matter what happens when you are together with your church, together with your spiritual family, together with your spiritual mentors, you know at the bottom of your heart that all is well and all will be well. That the tree with many roots is not easily blown over by the winds of hardship or the suffering and storms of life. We were riding down 14th Avenue the other day. Christina and I were on a little date trying to get some tacos. And every time we go on 14th, right around the Scott Sporting Goods, a little past that, we see this tall, thin palm tree that reaches into the sky. It's so funny because you don't see the top. If you're driving, you literally can't see the top of this tall, thin palm tree with a little spindly head at the top. And I wonder, how many hurricanes has that thing gone through in Vero Beach? What story could that tall, tall palm tree tell? Not only being rooted in this area and withstanding so many storms, but with the people who have passed by in its very thin shadow. I wonder what stories you have to tell of the many ways that you have been planted in your spiritual family, of all the storms that you have seen and have survived. Remember your sincere faith and your family, your roots. Every time I meet with a couple that I'm going to do the wedding, I know that when we go through premarital counseling, there's not going to be much that they remember. It's just one of those things you forget along the way. But I impress upon them over and over and over again that you need spiritual roots, that you need a support system, that you need to seek out an extensive support system that will ground you, so that when your relationship gets tough, you can lean on those people in your life. Young families today, we want to support you. We have so many more young families, and we're growing in our young adults ministry. As you can see, all the children gathering every Sunday. We want to let you know that you can plant your roots here for your children. And seasoned saints, I want to let you know that they need you. They need your wisdom. Our young families today, our marriages today, those who are seeking relationships need your advice, need you to support us. We need your prayers. My marriage needs you. The young families who are starting with little children and raising these children need you. But we also want to say to the young families that our seasoned saints need you. We need your youth and your vigor. We need your perspective. We need your global outlook on how to navigate a world that is quickly changing under our feet. And when we think about our roots, we need one another. And we need to be involved in each other's life in order to root ourselves as the storms of life come our way. Now, the fourth remembrance that Paul mentions is very different from the first three. The first three, Paul is talking about his own memory. What he is remembering as he roots himself and as he gathers that warm quilt around he and Timothy. But the fourth one is a challenge for Timothy to remember something, and that is to remember and rekindle the gift of God that had been planted within him from his grandmother, Lois, and his mother, Eunice. This is something that Timothy is being challenged to do, to remember that gift and to rekindle it. The Greek is literally to fan the flames of that gift within you. It's the language of rekindling that brings us back to the start of our conversation today, when we talked about how all of us are a patch, a strand of thread, but an ember. And this idea of rekindling the flame reminds us that alone an ember dies out, but with others we make up that burning, flaming furnace of God's mission and glory on earth. Rekindle, fan the flames of the gifts of God within you that have been placed there from your spiritual family, from those who encouraged you. And make no mistake, in turn, you are to help rekindle the gifts and to bring out the gifts in others, to plant those seeds of hope and encouragement in others. For all of us who have not received a spirit of cowardice or timidity, that we keep this to ourselves, but rather of boldness, as we stand on the shoulders of great Christians in our life. Just look over the names of those in our bulletin today. It's hard for me not to say Weeda's name without saying, I miss you, Weeda. It's hard not for me to look at so many others. Myrta's home, when we sat in her house and she talked about needing glasses to do the one thing she loved to do, which was read. Or perhaps to smile and hold Ace Capellan's hand and to tell them that I loved him. So we have to stand not with a spirit of timidity, but be mindful that we rekindle and remember the gifts that our saints and our loved ones have planted in us, but also to turn and to encourage others to rekindle their gifts as we receive a spirit of power. Power together, not alone. Of love, in which we love one another and we find ourselves learning how to love in community. And of self-control, of accountability. Discipleship includes accountability. It includes rebuke and correction. And we need the type of trust with one another where we can come along and walk alongside each other in order to keep each other accountable, just as much as we encourage each other and edify each other and love one another. So today I want to encourage you to wrap up our congregation in that patchwork quilt of all the saints. To feel its warmth against your body in order to fan the flames of those gifts. In order to remember constantly in prayer those whom God has placed in our life in order to encourage. And to remember a sincere, living faith that allows us to have the courage and the boldness to pass it on. And to let others know of the love of Christ and the faith that we share, for we're all in this together. So remember others in grateful praise and in prayer. Recall the tears that tell us the stories of our faith and of our love and of the risks we're willing to take. Remember the living faith of your spiritual family, finding yourself deeply rooted in the soil of community. And remember, above all, to rekindle your gift that God has given you. Amen.